the question, can you see my full screen?
Yep.
Yeah, I can.
Perfect. So, yes, had already started. I should send you the project guidelines because I postponed it because of the vacation and we have already extended our assignment too. However, I should do it now because in order that you start working with it. So you should expect from my side by today or maybe tomorrow to send you also the project guidelines. Also, assignment 2, I will start correcting them. I will share with you a solution. Maybe the solution can be one of your solutions if it will be an optimal solution, or I can provide my own solution. So after we have the guidelines, again, the project, it is a must. We don't have a midterm, but we have a project. There is a presentation should be done on the project. The presentation should be done offline or online. It's up to you. I will send all this information in the guidelines. For all the students who are going to watch this video later, as I always say, that I know that it is an asynchronous course. I want to thank Cora and Kirsten who are today, and this is good that I have somebody here because this communication and interaction will help all others. And as I always said, people who will join us will get bonus based on the different participation in the different exercises we will have it during the class. So, but people, if they still have any question, I'm happy to see them in the virtual office. By time I'm getting a lot of students joining my virtual office. However, I still can book for you a time during the week. So anyone need any support, don't hesitate to send me an email asking about a one-to-one meeting. I will be happy to help you. So today we will talk more about Java exceptions. Java exceptions. Today I will talk about Java exceptions. Maybe the next week we'll talk about how to read from file after we learn today the exceptions. So far in the course, we know about all the object-oriented concepts, how we can create different classes, and you have already practiced this in the assignment too, and all this polymorphism inheritance. And we talk about different data structure that you can use them, like the array list and the linked list. So you have enough. There are more to be discussed, but since we have a time limitation, we can discuss more about a topic that we have already different examples from this, like the data structure, array list, and linked list. So the exception is about the error that can take place. Kerson.
Yep.
Do you believe that the error, if we talk about an error that can take place when we are dealing with a program, so when can be the error?
What can be the errors?
When?
Oh, when can there be errors?
Yeah, it can be the error, the exception. The exception here means the error one. So when you believe that we can see an error, is it during when we are compiling the program or during running the program?
There's two different types. There's compile time error and runtime error, right? Is that what you're trying to get at? Okay, yeah.
I don't want to say it runtime and compile because in this way I'm giving you the answer.
Yeah.
Okay, so you said there is a compilation time error and there is a runtime error. So do you have an example about compilation time error?
Yeah, so when the compiler is trying to compile the code, but you've say that you've misspelled a variable, so you have variable x.
Okay.
And then use that, yeah.
Can you think about other examples where there is no syntax problem, however, there still can have a compilation error before we go to execution?
Maybe if there's ambiguity between two methods, like say if it I'm trying to think of how I should say this, but say you have two different you're trying to inherit two different classes into one class. You're like creating class and you try to inherit two different classes.
Perfect, yeah.
That
So you
would
mean
be
that you have illegal code to use it?
Yeah.
So there's so you use a code not just because you make mistakes in typing some variables, you use a code in an incorrect way. So
Yeah.
like what you want to say that we have, which means that class A and class B, they are inherit from class or from the same class. Maybe we want to say, or we want to say no. You have a class A inherited from class B and C at the same time, for example.
Yeah.
Yeah, but this is sometimes, yes, and also this is a very specific one. And okay, let's talk now about the runtime error. What about the runtime error?
I mean, if I'm gonna be completely honest, I kind of forget, but I know that they're like the code itself isn't wrong, but when you're oh wait, no, I actually have an example. I remember.
Yeah.
When I was trying to do my code, like it would run, but then I'm trying to remember what it was.
Can I help?
But
yeah, go ahead, Cora.
Yeah, for sure.
Example of runtime errors: dividing zero.
Yes.
Don't catch example. You don't put if statement if the divisor or dividend is 0. You should not do the division process, something like that.
100% correct. So in this case, what you are saying is correct, since it is because the code as itself, for example, dividing two numbers is something normal. And during compilation, since you said x divided by y, so there is no values for x and y. In this case, there is no error will be taking place during the compilation. And you can write a code that divide two numbers. However, later when you will get the input from the user, this input will not satisfy the all condition when talk about the division. For example, you can divide by 0. Yeah, so it's more about the input that the user is going later to provide for us during running the program, and this input will not satisfy all the condition or the standard that it should take place in this case. And now here, we as a programmer, we should catch this error, which means not let the program to stop at this error. No, we catch it and here's this word and we handle it. Okay, let's go and discuss more about this. So in Java exceptions, when you talk about Java exceptions, we are talking about when there is an error occur. So normally, if you didn't handle it as a programmer, so the program will stop and then the compiler will generate for you an error message. Sometimes we will not know exactly what's taking place, but we know that there is error in this line, for example. So the technical word we can use it in this case that Java will throw an exception. Because there is something abnormal, we expect something, and then there is another something taking place. So an exception will be thrown in this case. So if you are going to categorize the exceptions, how can be categorized? You have two types of the exception. As Kerson said, and then Cora gave us an example about it, that we have something we name it checked, unchecked. It is like unchecked, it is about runtime exception. So the runtime exception, when you talk that the user is going to provide, for example, an input which is not satisfied the environment or the standards that based on this, then we will get an error. Or we will have the checked one, which is it can be checked during the compilation error. Why we use the word checked, unchecked? Because when you build your program and when you compile it, it is checked by the compiler. For example, it's the most well-known example about the checked exception is about input-output. So in your code, you are asking there is an input or output, for example. So your compiler should be aware that this input or output that you are using is available. Normally we use a system-out println, so this is always available for print out, but sometimes we are going to use an input, and this input should be aware that it exists, and also the output. So when you are going to use input-output, your program or your compiler, sorry, is going to take care about and check if there is no exception or there is no error. So this will be done during the compilation time, and we name it a checked exception. We can catch this error and handle it, use throws with S. Because later during the lecture you saw another word named throw. So if it is a throws or a throw, so here we are talking about the checked exception or the compiled exception. We are talking more about the throw in this case, throw with S. The unchecked, like we said, like arithmetic exception, like the Quora told us that maybe we will have an arithmetic exception, null pointer, for example. Sometimes we will have an array out of range. So when you make a compilation, you create an array with 10 elements, and later the user is going to enter 11 elements. So during the runtime, you will get this error. But when you will compile it, there is no error happen because there was no entry from the user side. So if we talk about checked, unchecked one, so we can see here this piece of code with talk about checked, unchecked, runtime, and compilation time error. If there is an error, but here in this case there is no error, but we can handle. So, oh, sorry. So we are going to use input output. Since we are going to make an input out, so output print this, print to statement. So again, this will not make an error, but sometimes it can make an error when talk about input output. Maybe this output is busy, used by another program, another software, and sometimes this input is not anymore available. This is why, to be more professional, to be more on the safe side, we'll use the throws IO exception. In order to be sure that if this input output, there was a problem with it, the compiler will take care for this, and an exception will be thrown, and later you can be catched. We'll talk about catching and exceptions later, how it can be done. However, here, this is a checked exception. Here, if we will compile it, it will not give us an error. As Quora said, we are dividing by 0. So when we run this program, we will get this exception, and it will tell us that the exception is an arithmetic exception because we are dividing by 0. So how we are going to deal with such case? So a problem occur, like here, dividing by 0, or the input output is not available. But here it is available, so there is no input there is no problem will happen. The problem happened with the checked or the runtime. So if the problem occur, an exception will be created. Who is going to create the exception? The system. Now this exception will be thrown, which means that mean that it will be categorized which exception it is. You now as a programmer, you have to handle it. So how we can do it? We can use a try catch. So the try catch, how we can use it? we can use it in a way that the code that we expect later that there is unchecked exception can take place based on the input of the user. We can write it here under try. Try means that tells the compiler that here maybe there will happen an exception. If there's an exception, go to the catch. We can use this is the basic exception object, which tells any exception happen, which is the global one, the basic one. Or later we can see we can have different types of exceptions, and for each type we can have an action, which is a handling. So again, I have to double check the block of code that may happen an error there during runtime. And then I will make a catch to catch this exception. When the word catch here means that what is the action that I have to take based on this? What is the action that I have to take based on this?
I have a question.
Go ahead.
So ideally, whenever you have an input from a user, you'd want to use those try and catch keywords?
Yes, when you expect that there is unchecked exception can take place, so you have to put this is within a try, add a try block, and then later you are going, all exception will go to the catch one. If you don't use a special exception, like the arithmetic exception, because there is different types of exceptions, you can use a general exception object in this case. All exception will come here. Now your compiler will, okay, so now exception happen. What is going to do? Either it will give you this error if there is no handling for the exception and will stop the program, or there is an action you are going to define it what it has to do.
Okay, that makes sense.
Question, sir. Sorry.
Go ahead.
During try catch, so if I'm thinking no if statement needed, right?
Yeah, it's something like the if statement, but in the if statement, how it will work. You said if this happen, for example, you talk about dividing by 0, but you can't make it more generalized that talk about any arithmetic exception. You don't know exactly what is the arithmetic exception that can take place, but they can be a different arithmetic exception. So in this case, we talk about whenever there is an exception, whatever it is the exception. In this case, maybe there are different exceptions can take place, not only one. So you will define how to handle it. Now you have two choices. Either you go to the very general level by saying whenever there is an exception, catch it and do this. Or later, whenever there is an exception, you as a compiler double check what is this exception is. And based on the type of the exception, you are going to take an action. We will see an example about this today.
Okay.
So here, if you can see it, so this is another example about we have a class here, and we already defined an array, but this array, we said this is not an array list, it is an array. So far we know that an array has a limited size. So since we defined the array that has 3 elements, we can put in this array 4 elements. So here we want to go ahead and make us to go to index 10, even though we have only index 0, index 1, index 2. So we will get an error. The exception is array out of range. However, we don't make any handling for that. Again, so a problem occurs like here. You are asking to print out an index that doesn't exist. So your compiler will create an exception and throw it. And also it can know, your compiler can know which category it is exception is. Now you as a programmer, you have to handle this exception. What is the action that should take place in this case? As I said, try can be used. So I can use a try here, which means tell the compiler if in this block will happen any error, catch it and do this action. The action will say here, hey, something went wrong, but the software will not stop. If there is a further code, the further code will go ahead. So by handling this exception, you are catching it and take an action. Normally, most of the time, the action will be printing out a message to the user to be aware that there is an error take place and he has to enter the correct input. Or you can call another function in this case. So based on this example, you can see that the block that you want to check and to be aware about it, you put it under try, and now any error will happen here will be catched, and based on this is the action that will take place, and the software will not stop in this case. So the output here will not be anymore that there is an exception like here. The output will be something went wrong. There is another keyword we can use it, which is finally. The final statement let you execute here. So you make a try and a catch, and you can go further. It is an optional. It is not must always to use it. But also if you take an action and you can make another execution after the catching. Sometimes you want, okay, I will handle the exception by printing out for the user a message, and also there is another action I have to I have to execute it after catching the error. We can write this under finally. So we can have a try, catch, finally in this case. Try, catch, finally. You can't change the sequence. The sequence should be like this. Try, catch, finally. Try, you tell the compiler where the piece of code or the block of code that the compiler should be aware of this. And if there is an exception happen, don't stop the program. However, go to the catch one and catch it in this case, which means taking an action. Finally, which is a finally word, that you can have a further action or a further execution, whatever it is, that will take place after the action is being done. Like here, I just print out try, catch is finished. So we learned so far we have a try, catch, finally. But you can see here that I've said when I want to catch here, what I'm catching, any exception happen. Any exception happen. So any exception here happens, can be arithmetic exception, null pointer exception, any exception. I'm going to do this action. However, sorry, to be more specific, to be more realistic, normally we should consider that having an action based on the exception type to give the correct message to the user. Because the user here, okay, you tell the user something went wrong, but you don't tell the user what is the exact problem. But if I am aware that the exception that take place, for example, array out of range, I will tell exception type array out of range, I will tell the user it is out of range. If it is arithmetic, I will tell the user this is arithmetic. So the best way to do it is if you expect that different exception will take place and you will be aware about the type of this exception, go ahead and mention these exceptions here and make the action based on the exception type, not as a general action or that you should take care, in order that you give more information to the user about what's taking place in this case. This is another example about how we use finally with try and catch. So this is throws, which is the check compilation. It has nothing to do with runtime. Here we talk now about this code. The same example before, like dividing by 0. So the statement will never get executed because the control has shifted to the catch block. So whenever there is an error happen here, we are going to go to the catch one. In the catch, we'll print this out, and then we will make the finally as we said. Here it is. You see, this is it doesn't execute it here. The statement will never get executed. We can see it here. Why? Because here there is an error happen. The system will not stop. It will go here. It will make this action. Since this is finished and we have a finally, then we'll make this second one action. We can see it here. This is the final statement. This is, as I said, it will never be executed because it will jump from here to catch the exception. As far as in the real time where the exception happened, we are going to go there to catch it and take an action as we define within the catch block. This is what I go ahead, Kirsten. You want to ask me?
Yeah, I was just gonna ask you,
Right.
but then you went to the next slide and then it answered my question.
Okay. So as I said, sometimes you will have different exception in the same block can take place. And you want to print out a message or take an action, execute another function, whatever it is, the action you want to take it, based on the exception type. Your compiler can know the exception type. It is arithmetic, as I said, out of range, non-pointer, whatever it is. So you can have a multiple catch for the same try. Why? Because when you put a block or a piece of code within the try, your compiler, whenever there is an error happen, it will go to double check because you use a try. You already used a try. So since you use a try, your compiler is going to double check. Okay, use a try. Okay, so now I have to double check the catch here. It is the compiler know, for example, there is an arithmetic exception. Either you are going to, as I said before, make a catch exception E, whatever, so all exceptions can go there, or no, it will double check all catch you will have. Is one of them have the same type you define it that the exception now is taking place, then it will jump to this and execute the action as defined in this catch with this special type of exception in this case. Let's take an example about it, this example. So here we have an array. The array have 1, 3, 4, 2, 45, 6, for example. Or let's say one, whatever it is, we have set of 4, 5, 6. So I ask the array here to print, you see here we make two different exception. So I'm still within, this is the scope of try, yeah. So here I'm saying if system.out println array 131, which is, it doesn't exist here as an index. So we have array index out of range. This is the first exception. Then I ask also to print out 25 divided by 0. By the way, if this exception happen here, which type of it is array of index, it will stop and jump here and print out you are trying to access an index not in the array. And if the user is going to print out this one, so here we will go to this place, you are trying to divide by 0. Finally, this happen after we finish with the whole catch you will have if there is more than one catch will taking place. So this will happen after we finish all catches if you have all catches, if more than one catch block will be executed. This is the code that the final block it will doesn't here in this case. So you are trying to access index not in the array, the code is final here. Here we will not have, by the way, that system.out println 25 divided by 0. This will not be executed. Do you know this, Kirsten and Cora?
Yeah.
You always eat at this time.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
Either you take your lunch lately or you start your dinner early.
No, my mom came in and handed the dinner to me since I had no choice.
Yeah, you have to do it.
Yeah, I'm forced. So the reason why we don't get the second one is because, like you said, the subsequent statements in that try block, they never get executed because the control gets shifted to the catch block that caught the
Yes.
execution or the exception.
Yes. Yes. So in this case, whenever there is here an error will happen, and this already happened because we do it manually. But normally, why you have to write these 2 lines? Because normally we expect that later we are going to get an input from the user, and based on the input of the user, we are going to handle the exceptions that take place. So if we will ask the user for the index of an array, and then we can ask him to divide any number. So we have to define this 2 of them. And if we are put them all in the try, so whenever in this try an exception will happen, like this is the first exception will take place, you will be jumped directly to where you are going to handle the exception. In this case, since I said catch array index of the bound exception E, so it will go here. Here I didn't use the exception E, which is the global one. I was more specific since I expecting more than one error. So for each error, I will make the correct handling, and the user here can know exactly what's taking place and what was the error in order not to do it again when we will take another input from his side. Are you okay, Kura, so far?
Yeah, I'm still absorbing.
Also, you are taking dinner, but you don't have your mom. Who did for you the dinner now?
My husband
Ah,
just
good.
cooking.
That's good. He's a nice husband. He's taking care of the
He's a
home while
keeper.
you are studying. Yeah.
Yeah, very supportive.
Yeah, he's supporting you so much. Without knowing him, pass a hello for him and said, yeah, he's a nice man because he's supporting his wife with 3 kids that can have a degree. Because you are studying, you are in the bachelor or the diploma?
Diploma.
Okay, even though diploma, 2 years, it's not easy to finish it with all this responsibility. You need a support from his side.
Yeah. Whenever I go to the campus, we leave to the you all do the stuff for the kids.
Yeah, but maybe later he is going to start a degree for also, so you will support him later when you will finish.
Yeah. He's motivating me to
This happened to me. This happened to me in the same scenario because I got married while I was starting my PhD, and my wife, she was also studying. We were 2 students. We met and we got married, and then so we have a baby at that time. It was not easy because both of us were international students. So she said, okay, I will stop now till you finish your PhD, but be aware, after you finish, you have to take care in order I finish. Okay, we'll do it like this. So I finished my PhD and then she finished her degree and both of us finished our degree.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, yeah. It was not easy having a baby with studying. And at that time, both of us were students. Okay, so as I said, we can have multiple exceptions and we can have multiple catches with a try, and based on the exception, we'll take an action. So the last point before we practice and exercise with each other is about, so here, either we use the general exception object, so whenever there's an exception, go ahead and do this, but it will be very general and the user will not get enough information about what's taking place. Or we can use one of the predefined, there is a list, we have different classes, you can double check the list, or I can share a reference with you later when I upload the lecture. About like arithmetic, array of index, I can remember also null pointer. There is a lot of predefined classes, exception, you can use it. and to handle the exception based on this type of exception. However, you can also create your own exception out of this list. Here we will use a throw without S. So you can create, like here I create a class, custom exception, extend exception, which is, I said, this is a parent or the global class. And this is the throws that I talked about it. This talk more about the compilation error, about the checked exception. However, here I use a try, and I said, I can add in this try to throw a special exception. So I choose what exception later will be to be thrown when there is an error will take place in this block. So when there is an error placed in this block with a try, if I will add throw, I will use my custom exception to use it, and then here I will use a catch that will take any exception type. Also, I can use it. I can make this here is not exception E. I can use a custom exception, but custom exception E will catch this exception. This will catch all exceptions in this case. You can use also throw for non-customized exception, but there's no need to this, since it automatically will, the compiler will know these well-known exceptions. However, you can create your own and add it here. Are you okay, Kura, Kirsten, so far? No question? It is not a long lecture today, just I want to share these exceptions with you.
Yeah.
So, go ahead. Custom exception, there is a custom exception. This is a message will be printed out. So based on what we have already discussed, do we need to have to consider always exception handling when we are writing a code? Yes, we have to do it. So it helps to separate error handling code from the regular code. Because when you will go to try and catch, in the catch, you specify exactly what action has to be done whenever there is an exception. This piece of code, it's not part from the whole code execution if everything normal and there is no exception. If you, Cora said, why not do it if else? Yes, you can do it if else. If this happened, go do this. But now as if adding more code to the exact code, but the way you are going to separate the exception from the regular execution, so now it will give us a more clear and well structured. This is the code how normally should be executed, and whenever there is an exception, you have to go here to execute this. So handling exceptions not anymore be part of this code, and we should always consider, as I said, because we expect to get an input from the user, and we don't know the user later what. Even though sometimes we'll ask the user some restriction and giving him some messages, be aware about this, but still there's an exception happen. And sometimes when we talk about Java software, this is more advanced. The data source sometimes comes from another place when you deal with multi-source of data, and you don't know exactly the source of data that later what kind of data is going to handle for you, and this will make a misuse or mis-execution to the code. So you should consider always to have this exception handling when you will expect that maybe there is an exception will take place. Exception handling groups similar types of error and handle them inside one block. Yes. This is similar to multiple catch, that you will have the same block. However, the same block can have different exceptions. So by using this exception handling, we just will tell the user tell the compiler, for this code, you will have different scenarios. As we did when we talk about multi-catch. Yes, this is also concerning ordering and grouping, because if you remember in one of the examples when we talk about also multi-catch, so whenever there was the first exception happen, doesn't execute the second line, go to the catching. So we are now more organizing the flow of the code, because normally without this, the code will go line by line, line by line. So, but now no, when we have a try and a catch, there is an exception, it will jump to the catching and it will not go to the other line in the try in this case. So we are changing the flow of how your code or the order execution should be done based on try and catch, as we have already discussed so far. Best practice of Java exception. So what different hints we have to consider when we build this try and catch or build this exception handling? Try and catch, we can name it, as I said, exception handling, because we are using it to handle the exceptions that are taking place. So I will start with the last one. We should use always a single catch block for multiple exceptions. This is what we said before. So, for example, don't go ahead, if in this piece of code you will have more than one line and each line will maybe expect different exceptions. Okay, so put them all in the same try, but you can have different exceptions. So in this case, it will take a less code size. Again, when we talk about the code size, we talk about having more optimal code. What we mean by more optimal, which means more efficient. What we mean by more efficient, it will take less execution time. Maybe now in such kind of a very, very simple exercise we are talking about, you can see this. But what about a huge project that will have thousands of code lines? So you always have to go to less complexity. And maybe at the beginning of this course, I don't remember or another course, I talked about that evaluating a code, it's not by the number of the lines. It's by complexity. So does it mean that you have 100 lines and another code have 10 lines? So the 100, it will be better from the 110 lines? No. It will be no. Maybe if they are talking about the same scenario, the 10 lines, it will be better from the 100 lines, because it will be less complex, it will be, and then it will execute in a faster way. And this is one of the parameters that we have to consider. And throwing errors as soon as exception happens. So if you're talking about customized error, or which means that you are going to throw the error. You as a user, you want to throw this error. There are still some errors that the system will throw and you have to catch it. But go ahead and try to throw the errors exactly, or whenever you can see there will be happen an error, in order later, if unhandled exception represents a compiler log error together and one has to go, as you see this, the stack trace looking for the line which error occurred, because there is a logging for all error inside your compiler. And it has to make you put them all in the whole stack. So rather than collecting them, go ahead and do it again. There is here an error, make a handling, go ahead directly where there is error, define the handling at the same place where it should be whenever there is an error can be expected. Are you done, Kerson and Cora, to practice an exercise? You finish your dinner?
Yeah, we're good.
What about Cora?
Maybe we're on 7 p.m. for dinner. I can still do the exercise.